Getting a 6-inch lift kit that either includes a longer factory replacement front strut, or even worse, a pair of strut spacers, means that you're not getting the kind of performance that your truck really needs to romp around off-road with impunity. That's why our friends over at BDS teamed up with Fox to develop this powerful and heavy-duty coilover kit specifically for the 2014 and up F150s with a 6-inch lift. After removing the front wheels, we can access all we need in the front suspension. The axle nut, which will usually have a dust cover, can be removed to start disassembly. Next, we unbolted the tie rod from the knuckle and pulled it up and out. You might need to hammer it loose. Unbolt the upper control arm connection to the knuckle, but leave this nut loosely threaded on for the time being. Move on to the sway bar connection. Once the nut is removed on each side, swing the sway bar off the end link. Now we removed all of the brake lines and brackets that are attached to the knuckle so they don't get stretched when we hang the suspension. To make this install a hell of a lot easier, we now slightly loosened the upper control arms so the tension is no longer on the arms. Now for our last bit of access, we removed the upper dust shield with our trim removal tool. Now that we have plenty of space, the 3 upper nuts can be removed from the coilover or spacer, whichever your truck has. Now with a pry bar to hold the tension of the upper control arm just in case, remove the upper control arm nut and raise the UCA out of the knuckle. We then held the control arm up with a towel to keep it out of the way when we go to pull the coilover. Under the lower control arm is the last 2 bolts to remove, which hold in the lower coilover mount. We removed these bolts, pulled the 4-wheel drive vent tube, and pulled the knuckle away to remove the old coilover. The new Fox 2.5 coilover kit is a much better setup than our 2.0 coilovers with their lift spacers. We set the new Fox kit in the truck and loosely threaded in the lower bolts to the mount. You might have to pry down on the lower control arm to squeeze the new coilover into the upper mount. Then we lowered the upper control arm back down and slowly jacked up the lower control arm to set the coilovers into the upper mount. The shock reservoir bracket can then be set on the upper mount, and then loosely add the new hardware to the top of the coilover. The jack stand can now be lowered from the lower control arm since the suspension is all loosely bolted together. Now the top 3 coilover nuts can be torqued down. We can also start bolting the rest of the suspension back in. We started by swinging the sway bar back down onto the end link and bolting it back down. Next, the coilover can be tightened down in the lower control arm. We can now insert the axle back into the knuckle and swing it back up into the upper control arm. We then replace the axle nut. Do not over-tighten this and risk breaking the axle shaft. Next, we torque down the upper control arm nut in the knuckle and replace the dust shield. The tie rod can now be inserted into the knuckle and tightened up. All of the brake line brackets and lines that you may have removed can then be replaced. The upper control arms are up next and they can be fully tightened up. Finally, set the shock reservoir onto the plate with the new band clamps and tighten it down to complete the installation. These finely tuned and custom designed Fox 2.5 Remote Reservoir Coilovers are some of the most rugged and high-performing off-road suspension products out there for the F150s with 6-inch lifts. It will give your truck a huge improvement in response, articulation, and fade reduction over stock struts and OE-style lift struts. You can also pair them with Fox's Rear 2.0 shock upgrade to really get the full performance you're after for your F150.